They are powerful, majestic creatures, the ultimate apex predator.
People have an inherent fear of tiger sharks because, they regard them as the villains of the ocean. But they're not.
Famous for their telltale stripes, these tigers of the sea live in the warm and temperate waters of the world's oceans.
They're very large, they're very charismatic, and they have an amazing variety of behaviors that are not well understood.
The tiger shark is very broad in what it eats, where it lives. It's just as happy in 5 feet of water as in 5,000 feet of water. They undertake huge migrations. They are a very, very amazing animal.
Sharks are among the oldest creatures on the planet, but now man is threatening their existence.
They are the product of 400 million years worth of evolution, and they've been around all this time because they are a successful animal. They just can't cope with overfishing.
In order to manage shark fisheries properly and to conserve sharks, we must have good biological information on these animals.
There's a lot that's yet to be discovered about tiger sharks. They're pretty enigmatic.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Batchelor Foundation, encouraging people to preserve and protect America's underwater resources, and by Divers Direct, inspiring the pursuit of tropical adventure scuba diving.
In the fall of 2011, a group of experienced researchers and charter fishermen leave South Florida and head to Chub Cay in the Bahamas. Their goal is to catch 3 tiger sharks and attach satellite tags to their dorsal fins to track their movements.
We want to know where tiger sharks go, how far they go, and to do that, we use a combination of techniques.
Dr. Mahmoud Shivji is the director of the Guy Harvey Research Institute at Nova Southeastern University's Oceanographic Center in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Together with his collaborator, Dr. Brad Witherby, he has studied tiger sharks all over the world.
We work all the way from Australia to the Western Atlantic.
On this trip, the researchers hope to collect more information to add to their growing database.
Fishing for sharks is probably easier than fishing for a lot of things. Basically, if you put a hook in the water with some bait on it, then there's a good chance that you can catch a shark. Usually we long line,
which is a line of about 1,200 feet that has 20 to 25 hooks on it, and we drop that in the ocean.
A long line resembles a clothesline that stretches horizontally in the water, with an anchor holding it in place at each end.
And we also use a technique we call drum lines, and that's just a vertical line that goes all the way from the top with an anchor at the bottom, and we go down to about 400 to 500 feet and put out hooks from this vertical line.
And you can use large bait.
Fish like in the tuna family, or things like jacks, that when you cut them open, they're bloody and smelly and oily. And we have a pretty good success rate in catching tiger sharks with that type of bait.
You ready? Okay, toss it over.
Once the lines are set, it is time to wait for the sharks to bite. The scientists' past research in Bermuda has revealed some interesting data.
We started tiger shark tracking with our colleagues from the Bermuda Shark Project, and we found some remarkable results. We've managed to track some tiger shark individuals for over 2 years now.
The general pattern was that they would leave Bermuda, move south. There's been a number of sharks that have gone straight to the Bahamas. They get there in a week or 10 days or so, travel 800 miles, 1,000 miles. It's like they knew exactly where they're going, and then they would cruise around the islands of the Bahamas. Some of them from September, October, all the way through the spring, and then they would leave the Bahamas and go out into the open ocean again. And at first, we were expecting them to go back to Bermuda. You know, they'd spend the summer in Bermuda and they'd spend the winter in the Bahamas, but they never went back to Bermuda. They spent basically 5-6 months out in the open ocean, hundreds of miles, 1,000 miles away from Bermuda, which was pretty surprising to us that they were out there for such a long time. Bermuda, contrary to what we were initially thinking, isn't an island hub like the Bahamas is, where they spend all this time. It's more like a rest area or a pit stop.
After observing these migration patterns, the experts initially assumed that a drop in the water temperature around Bermuda was driving all the tiger sharks south in the winter.
We've satellite tagged and tracked over 30 sharks from Bermuda, and most of those were adults that made these long distance migrations to the south during the fall and the winter. And so we expected all the tiger sharks to leave Bermuda at that time, but much to our surprise, 3 juveniles stayed around Bermuda throughout the winter. And so that raised the question as to whether it was really temperature that was driving the sharks south. So what we're considering now is the possibility that the 3 young animals didn't leave because they were too small to make these long-distance migrations.
There are many questions the scientists still hope to answer.
There must be something that causes them to go those enormous distances. Is it food? Is it mating? We have no idea at this particular time. And that's the next thing we'd like to look at.
All right. Yeah, we're a little more than halfway done right now on this set.
After collecting great migratory data from sharks tagged off Bermuda, Mahmoud and Brad are interested to see what sharks tagged in the Bahamas will do.
If they seasonally migrate like the Bermuda ones, or to see whether there's tiger sharks, some that hang out in the Bahamas.
All right, you're set, Zane.
So the goal is to increase our sample size and fill in some of the gaps that we have with the tracking that we've done in the other locations.
After several hours of fishing, a small female tiger shark is on the line. The animal is brought on board, and a water hose is placed in the shark's mouth to keep oxygen moving across its gills so the animal can breathe. After some basic data is collected, it's time to attach the satellite tag.
The tags that we've been using are called spot tags, which stands for Smart Position or Temperature. In order to attach these spot tags really securely to the shark's fin so that it stays on for a long period of time, we have to drill holes in the fin to bolt the tag onto. The fins have no nerve endings, and just like with us humans, when we cut our fingernails, we feel no pain. We think that with the sharks, it's the same situation. Now, these tags only work on animals that go to the surface a lot, because for the data to be transmitted to a satellite, the antenna on this tag has to break the surface of the ocean. Now, luckily for us, it turned out that tiger sharks do spend a lot of time on the surface.
And when the shark comes to the surface and the antenna sticks out of the water, then the tag will turn on and start sending a signal to satellites that are orbiting overhead. And if a couple of satellites identify that transmitter, it can triangulate a position and it'll give you a latitude and longitude.
This device runs off batteries. And when the batteries run out, then you stop hearing from the shark. But the tags that we've been using have been amazingly good. We've been hearing from sharks for over a year in many cases, and in a few cases over 2 years.
As soon as the shark is worked up, it's returned to the water. With one shark down, the crew continues to set lines and fish. But no other tiger sharks bite. After an unsuccessful second day of fishing, the team decides to head northwest to the Bahamian island of Bimini. Scientists had previously found tiger sharks in this area, and it doesn't take long before the crew has a 10-foot male on the line.
Easy, buddy.
You catch the shark and bring it up next to the boat, put a rope around its tail so you can stretch it out alongside the boat, and it calms it down and immobilizes it so that you can work on it, and then you have access to the shark to do whatever you want to. It's in the water, it's got water going across its gills, and most sharks that we work with hold up pretty well under those conditions, and they're just fine when we let them go.
One of the very interesting things that we've discovered as part of this long-term tracking is the fact that tiger sharks are able to utilize remarkably different habitats.
There's not very many animals that move seamlessly between the coral reef, which is a highly specialized, highly energetic marine ecosystem, to the open ocean, which is like a desert. So to have a shark spend 6 months here and 6 months out there, it's very unusual, and it requires a very flexible type of biology that you can exist in those two different types of ecosystems.
Shortly after the first tiger shark is caught, another large male takes the bait.
I see it, right there, see it?
Why do we need to know where tiger sharks go? Well, you have to look at the big picture here. Sharks are being overfished worldwide for their fins. And when I say overfished, I mean, that's not an understatement. They're being severely overfished, and shark populations around the world have declined enormously.
Sharks have life history characteristics that make them vulnerable to overfishing. They don't have very many young, they grow slowly, they mature late. So unlike some fish that are making thousands and thousands of eggs every year, sharks have a few young, so they can't build up their populations very fast if they're overfished.
These are apex predators in the ocean. You know, it's very much like saying, what does it matter if all the lions in the Serengeti in Africa are killed off or hunted? Of course it matters, because these are top-level predators that affect the entire ecosystem below them. In the same way, sharks, and especially big sharks like tiger sharks, play this very important role in the marine ecosystem. If you understand the biology of the sharks, you can then manage human behavior so that you don't allow humans to fish sharks in particular places where they might be most sensitive to being overfished. For example, where they give birth, or example, during their migratory pathways. Once you know them, you can then implement regulations to say that you shouldn't be fishing in these particular areas at this particular time.
By some estimates, tiger sharks in the Northwest Atlantic are thought to have declined by 65% since 1986. To protect the species, the state of Florida banned the sale, possession, and harvest of tiger sharks in its waters in November 2011.
The rate of extraction has been so rapid, people haven't really had a chance to look into the very private lives of some of these animals, which is why the Bermuda Shark Project and the GHRI collaboration has been a real fantastic project to be involved with.
The Guy Harvey Research Institute, or GHRI, is named after and supported by renowned marine life artist and marine scientist Dr. Guy Harvey.
I like all big oceanic animals, especially the bigger fish, and so I put a lot of time and effort into being with them in one place or another, and I spent a lot of time with them underwater, capturing images on film and images just for my own reference for paintings.
Together with his friends, Wyland and Jim Abernathy, Guy recently produced a documentary about tiger sharks. In the film, Guy and his friends dive with tiger sharks up close, dispelling the myth that sharks are crazed man-eaters. Instead, they argue, there are ways to safely interact with them. The animals are a great asset for ecotourism operations and ultimately worth more alive than dead.
People want to have that experience of seeing a large animal close to them and do it time and time again. And so an individual shark may be sold for a couple $100 for the fins, maybe 300 at the most. Maybe the teeth go for some more $100 and the liver and some meat. So you're looking at about $500, $600, $700 for a one-time profit. That shark in its lifetime may be seen, over a 20-year period by thousands of visitors, and each one of whom has paid a lot of money to have that experience. So in its lifetime, it could be worth several $1 million.
A number of studies have shown that sharks can be of great economic value for the tourism industry. Realizing this, the Bahamas banned all commercial shark fishing in its waters in 2011. In the same year, several other countries put regulations in place to create shark sanctuaries. Within just a few weeks, one of the 3 tiger sharks tagged by Mahmoud and Brad traveled hundreds of miles along the coast of Florida, while the other 2 stayed close to the Bahamas. In addition to observing their migratory patterns, Mahmoud also analyzes DNA samples of tiger sharks to compare their populations across the globe.
Our initial results on the genetic analysis are showing that tiger sharks in the North and South Atlantic form one big genetic pool. But they're very different from tiger sharks in the Indian Ocean and from the Pacific. Tiger sharks from the Indian Ocean and Pacific also form one big genetic pool. So what that means is that tiger sharks within the Atlantic are moving long distances, but they're staying within the Atlantic. And tiger sharks in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, it's a huge area. They're able to move far enough to interbreed and maintain the Indian Ocean and the Pacific as one genetic population.
Mahmoud didn't set out to study sharks, but rather fell into it by chance. While he started his career as a field marine biologist, his doctorate degree is in genetics.
I wanted to try and sort of blend the two together because genetic tools are very powerful tools.
One day, Mahmoud happened to read a newspaper article about the difficulties fisheries managers were having with identifying different shark species by looking at the cut-up carcasses fishermen were bringing back to the dock.
I thought, you know, we can use DNA techniques to figure out what species of shark it is if the genetic markers are developed. So I contacted the National Marine Fisheries Service about 15 years ago and said, would you mind sending me some tissue samples from sharks of known identity, and I will see if I can use DNA tools then to be able to make genetic markers to identify those species. And that was the start of my journey in the shark genetics game. The trick is to get the DNA out of this piece of tissue. And the way we do that is we add some enzymes to it and then allow the tissue to fall apart or to lyse, which will cause the DNA to spill out. And I will now incubate this piece of tissue with the enzymes for about 3 hours.
Once the tissue has been incubated, it's time to separate the DNA from the degraded tissue.
The way we do that is by employing a type of filter which will separate the DNA from the goo, giving us very clean DNA. And this needs to be spun around in this machine that will cause the filter to separate out the purified DNA, which is what we want, from the rest of the material.
This step is repeated several times until the purified DNA has been separated.
And we can take this purified DNA and then either sequence it to determine the order of the DNA bases, the A's, T's, C's, and G's, or we can use the rapid forensics methods that we've developed here to identify which species of shark that fin came from.
Sequencing DNA is time-intensive and costly, so Mahmoud developed a cheaper and faster method to ID shark species.
We developed these tiny snippets of DNA that we call primers, and they're essentially DNA markers for specific species. Each species has its own marker, and we've developed these markers now for 32 of the 50-ish sharks that are traded internationally in the fin trade. And the motivation to do that was that in developing countries where many of the sharks are being fished, those governments either don't have the resources or don't want to invest the resources in very high-tech DNA sequencing technologies.
Using Mahmoud's forensic technique, researchers can identify a shark species in 3 hours.
And what's really cool is that it's being used internationally, and it's being used to make a real difference, because you can have all the regulations you want about protecting individual species, but if you don't have the tools, if you don't have the teeth to enforce those regulations, then they don't do you much good. And our tools have provided the teeth, if you will, to enforce these regulations.
Mahmoud's skills proved to be very useful to NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement. Its agents are tasked with enforcing federal fishing regulations. Before shark finning at sea became illegal in U.S. waters, the law enforcement officers often had to identify sharks by their fins only.
It was almost impossible for the agents to identify these fins. Try to keep in mind what 40 or 50 different species of sharks are, and that's just in the southeast U.S. Blacktips and spinners look very similar. This is actually a spinner shark. It looks like the tips were dipped in ink, whereas this one here is a blacktips. Again, same type of look, so to the untrained eye, good luck with that. So we rely heavily upon folks like Dr. Mahmoud Shivji to say, Paul, what you sent me is blacktips. And within a week, he'd give us an affidavit telling us exactly what we were suspecting or not suspecting, and we would move the case forward, but depending on his results. So he is a great asset for law enforcement.
While the United States and a handful of other countries have strict shark fishing rules in place, many countries do not, and there is no one patrolling the high seas.
Shark fins are in extremely high demand in many parts of the world, and the price of shark fins is extremely high, and so there's great economic incentive for people to go after sharks just for their fins.
Shark fin soup is a delicacy in several Asian countries.
Shark fins have been consumed for over 2,000 years. So what's the problem now? The problem is that shark fins in historical times were used largely by the aristocracy, by people that had lots of wealth. But as Asian economies have improved over the last decade or so, more people can afford to buy them on the market.
Today, the shark fin trade is a multi-million-dollar business. In some instances, fishermen brutally cut off the fins while the shark is still alive. Then they toss the animal's body back in the water, leaving it to bleed to death or drown.
We know that there are at least 80 countries that supply the fin trade. Sharks are being caught by essentially all coastal countries, including the United States.
A few years ago, Dr. Shelley Clark from Imperial College in London and Mahmoud's team at the GHRI conducted a pioneering study into the fin trade by using a combination of field work and DNA forensics approaches. Data Dr. Clark collected in Hong Kong suggested that fins from somewhere between 26 to 73 million sharks were traded annually as of the year 2000.
Now, that was over a decade ago. We don't know what that number is now. But that doesn't mean that that's the total number of sharks being killed, because sharks could be killed just for their meat, where their fins don't end up in the fin trade, and sharks are also caught incidentally in other fisheries, and nobody is keeping track of how many sharks are being killed in these ways. So bottom line, these are very conservative numbers.
Despite this fact, Shelley Clark's and Mahmoud's study showed that these numbers were 3 to 4 times greater than what countries reported to the United Nations Global Database of Shark Catches.
What this means is that there's tremendous underreporting by countries of the number of sharks that are being killed. And the difference, 3 to 4 times, is enormous.
While exact figures may be hard to come by, there is no question that sharks are overfished.
It's difficult to say exactly how many species are in ecological trouble. Of the 400 plus species of sharks that are known, only about 50-ish are actually a big component in the fin trade. There is no doubt that all these big sharks that are being fished have declined tremendously. The numbers range from, depending on the species and depending on where you look, from 40% to 90%. And that's a staggering level of declines.
Awareness of the problem is increasing. Several U.S. states have banned the sale of shark fins, but experts say a global effort is necessary to create a sustainable shark fishery. Shark experts like Mahmoud and Brad are doing their part to learn as much about the animals as possible, to give resource managers the information they need to make informed fisheries management decisions in the future.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Batchelor Foundation, encouraging people to preserve and protect America's underwater resources, and by Divers Direct, inspiring the pursuit of tropical adventure scuba diving.